night stretches out across the desert like a velvet blanket, quiet and endless. The air is still, carrying only the faintest rustle of sand as it shifts across the ground. Above, the sky is clear, an ocean of black, scattered with silver stars that seem to shine a little brighter in this remote corner of the world. The moon hangs low, casting its pale glow over the barren land, softening the sharp ridges of mesas and the rugged lines of the mountains in the distance. Everything appears at peace, as though the desert itself has fallen into slumber. It is in these moments of silence that we often feel the universe most strongly, away from the noise of cities, away from the restless hum of machines and human voices. The desert becomes a place where the unknown feels closer. The stars seem nearer, their light more direct, almost intimate, as if whispering ancient stories that most of us have long forgotten how to hear. This is where tonight's journey begins, not in chaos or drama, but in stillness, under a sky vast enough to hold both secrets and dreams. Imagine yourself lying back beneath that desert sky. The earth beneath you feels cool, grounding, while the endless canopy above feels infinite. Breathing slows, shoulders loosen, and thoughts drift. In this state of relaxation, you begin to sense that beneath the calm surface of the world, mysteries are always stirring. Just as the desert hides the tracks of animals that passed by in the day, so too does history cover the traces of events that may not have been meant for us to uncover. Yet every so often, a fragment slips through. As you rest here, we step gently back in time. The year is the late 1940s, and America stands at the edge of a new era. The war has ended, but peace is uneasy, fragile. Ordinary people go about their lives, raising families, working on farms, building towns, but the air carries a quiet tension. Governments are watching the skies, scanning the airwaves, and guarding secrets. In these years, experiments are launched in silence, projects are given code names, and truth itself begins to split into layers: what is seen, what is said, and what is hidden. The desert, timeless and patient, becomes the perfect stage. To the ranchers and families living here, it is a place of solitude and survival. To the military, it is a laboratory, a testing ground, and perhaps even a vault. And to the storytellers who would come later, it is a landscape made for mystery, endless horizons, distant lights, and shadows that suggest something more than what we can explain. As the night deepens, imagine the silence broken by something unusual, a faint sound, almost metallic, carried on the wind, a shimmer of light where no light should be. For the people who lived here, such moments were not easily explained away. A world still recovering from war, a world where technology was advancing faster than most could understand, was also a world ready to wonder. Was it just a balloon drifting too far from its tether? A secret craft flying higher than anyone had imagined possible? Or was it something stranger still, something not of this earth? Before we arrive at the events themselves, before names like Roswell and Project Mogul enter the story, we pause here, at the threshold. For tonight's tale is not only about what happened, but about how mystery itself takes root. It grows in the quiet spaces, in the gaps between official words and private memories, in the dissonance between what is explained and what is experienced. The desert holds these silences well, cradling them the way sand cradles fallen stones, keeping them buried until curiosity uncovers them once more. You may notice, as you breathe deeply and sink further into this story, that mysteries often begin this way, slowly, quietly, without anyone realizing their significance at first. A rancher rides out across his land and sees something unusual lying among the sagebrush. A press release is written too quickly, and then retracted just as quickly. A single headline sparks the imagination of a nation, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the story grows larger than the event itself, fed by secrecy, denial, and the timeless human desire to seek the unknown. But here, in this first chapter, we need not hurry. The night is long, and there is space enough to drift. As the stars shine overhead, we remind ourselves that the unknown is not something to fear, but something to approach with patience. A mystery does not need to be solved to be meaningful. Sometimes it is the presence of unanswered questions that makes the world feel alive. In the desert silence, each grain of sand, each glimmer of starlight, each forgotten sound in the wind, feels like part of a larger pattern we have yet to understand. So we linger here, at the edge of history, where the quiet desert night holds the promise of secrets soon to be uncovered. What begins as calm and stillness will soon unfold into a tale of hidden projects, government secrecy, cultural transformation, and the enduring power of human imagination. But for now, breathe deeply, allow the silence to settle, and let your thoughts drift into the expanse of the night sky. The story is waiting, patient and unhurried, ready to carry you into both history and mystery. The late 1940s were a strange and delicate moment in history. The Second World War had ended only a few years earlier, but its echoes lingered in every corner of daily life. Families were rebuilding, soldiers were returning home, and entire nations were trying to redefine themselves after years of destruction. In the United States, victory brought pride and optimism, but beneath that surface lay unease. The world had changed forever, and the shadow of a new kind of conflict stretched across the horizon. The Cold War was already beginning to stir. Tension with the Soviet Union crept into headlines and conversations, though many ordinary citizens could not fully grasp the complexities of espionage, atomic weapons, and shifting alliances. Still, they could feel the anxiety in the air. For the first time in history, humanity had the ability to annihilate itself with nuclear fire, and this knowledge weighed heavily, even if it was rarely spoken aloud. Nations no longer measured their power only in armies or territory, but in secrets, technologies, and the ability to outmaneuver their rivals in silence. In small towns across America, life appeared calm on the surface. Children walked to school, stores opened each morning with their familiar routines, and farmers tended to their crops. Yet newspapers carried headlines about espionage trials, about atomic tests in distant deserts, about a world that seemed far larger and more dangerous than it had only a decade before. The pace of technological change was dizzying. Jet engines, rockets, radar, and atomic research advanced so quickly that many civilians struggled to comprehend the new possibilities. To some, these changes inspired awe. To others, they sparked unease. The deserts of New Mexico and surrounding regions played a unique role in this era. These landscapes, vast and largely uninhabited, became testing grounds for secret projects. The Trinity test, the first atomic explosion, had shaken the desert only 2 years earlier, in 1945. In that moment, the world entered the nuclear age. Now those same skies and sands became host to other experiments, many cloaked in secrecy, many invisible to the people living nearby. For locals, the desert was a place of ranching, hard work, and survival. For the military, it was a canvas upon which the next chapter of global power might be written. To understand the mystery of Roswell, one must first understand this atmosphere. The United States government had become deeply invested in keeping information hidden, not out of malice, but out of what leaders saw as necessity. Secrets were essential. If the Soviets could detect American nuclear capabilities, the balance of power could shift. Every experiment, every new device, every classified project had the potential to shape the world order, and so, a culture of silence and compartmentalization took root. Even minor programs were given code names. Even low-level workers often did not know the purpose of the tasks they performed. At the same time, a new cultural phenomenon was emerging in the public imagination, the idea of flying saucers. In 1947, only weeks before Roswell, a man named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing strange objects darting across the sky over Washington state. He described them as moving like saucers skipping across water, and within days, the press had created a new phrase, flying saucer. Stories of unusual lights, strange aircraft, and unidentified objects began appearing in newspapers across the country. For a public already living with Cold War tension, these reports stirred both fear and fascination. Were these strange craft, Secret Soviet technologies? Were they experimental American projects? Or were they something else entirely, something beyond Earth itself? Imagine living in that moment, in a small town far from the centers of government and science. One day you might read about the atomic bomb, the next about spies being arrested, and the next about mysterious disks in the sky. The world felt simultaneously larger and more mysterious, filled with both danger and wonder. For ranchers and farmers in New Mexico, the desert sky they had always known now seemed to hold possibilities far beyond what they could explain. In this world of secrecy, speed, and sudden innovation, it was perhaps inevitable that confusion would arise. Ordinary people might stumble upon extraordinary things without knowing their origin. The military might conceal harmless experiments with the same intensity as world-changing technologies. And when gaps appeared between what people saw and what they were told, stories grew to fill those spaces. The stage was perfectly set for the events that would soon unfold in Roswell. A remote ranch, a strange collection of debris, a military base nearby, and a nation already tuned to wonder about flying saucers. All of these ingredients combined in just the right way to ignite one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. The cultural soil was ready, fertile for legends, shaped by tension, secrecy, and imagination. As you breathe deeply, you might notice how natural it feels for mystery to grow in such a climate. When official voices spoke in half-truths, when technology advanced beyond understanding, and when the desert night stretched vast and unknowable, it was easy to believe that something extraordinary could be waiting just beyond the horizon. So we linger here for a moment longer, picturing America in the late 1940s, a country both confident and uncertain, proud yet anxious, illuminated by the promise of progress, but shadowed by secrecy. This is the backdrop against which Project Mogul would rise. This is the world in which a simple discovery on a ranch would transform into a story that has lasted more than 70 years. The desert night holds its breath, and the story moves forward. The stage is set. The curtain is about to rise on Project Mogul, and with it the beginning of one of the most enduring mysteries of our time. The story of Roswell cannot be told without pausing to understand the secret project that would later be named as its explanation. Project Mogul. It was a program born from the anxieties of the late 1940s, when the United States and the Soviet Union stood on opposite sides of a new global divide. Each nation sought an advantage, and for America, the question was clear. How could they know if the Soviets were preparing, or had already succeeded, in detonating a nuclear weapon? The answer, at least for a time, came in the form of the sky itself. Scientists realized that nuclear explosions produced unique sound waves, low-frequency ripples that could travel vast distances through the upper atmosphere. If you could capture those signals, you might know when, and even where, an enemy had tested a bomb. But to listen to such faint whispers, equipment needed to be lifted high above the earth, into regions of the sky untouched by everyday noise. And so, Project Mogul was born. Its tools were not rockets or satellites, which did not yet exist, but balloons, long strings of them, made of lightweight material and carrying sensitive instruments. These balloons could ascend into the stratosphere, drifting silently for hundreds of miles, while their microphones and sensors captured what human ears could never hear. To the scientists who worked on it, this was cutting-edge research, the kind of quiet innovation that could tip the scales of the Cold War. But secrecy was essential. The public could not know what was being tested. Even most military personnel who handled the balloons did not fully understand their purpose. They were told only enough to perform their duties. The name itself, Mogul, was meant to be bland and meaningless, just another code among countless others that filled government files. And so, the project unfolded in silence, far from the eyes of ordinary citizens. Imagine for a moment how these balloons must have looked when they drifted down to Earth. Some were hundreds of feet long, their skins made of shimmering material that caught the sunlight in strange ways. Attached to them were clusters of radar reflectors, geometric shapes made of metal foil and balsa wood, designed to make the balloons visible to tracking equipment. To a rancher stumbling upon the wreckage, the debris might have seemed baffling. Thin sheets of silvery metal that crumpled and sprang back, sticks arranged in odd patterns, and strange symbols or tape markings unlike anything familiar. To someone unaccustomed to advanced military technology, the scene might have appeared almost otherworldly. The scientists and engineers who developed these devices were part of a small, elite community. They worked quietly, aware that their contributions might never be recognized publicly. Their achievements were measured not in applause, but in secrecy, in keeping the nation safe while remaining invisible. Some later recalled how the project demanded constant launches, constant adjustments, and constant secrecy. The desert sky became their laboratory, balloons rising daily, like ghostly figures against the horizon. For the military, this was standard procedure. Projects were compartmentalized, their purposes disguised, and any unusual debris was swiftly recovered. But for civilians who happened upon such material, the experience could be deeply confusing. To them, these objects were unlike anything seen before, both familiar and alien at once. And when questions arose, answers were often vague or contradictory, because secrecy demanded it. Looking back, official reports have insisted that the Roswell incident was nothing more than one of these Mogul balloons. The explanation is logical. The location matched, the timeline aligned, and the debris described by witnesses resembled the radar reflectors used in the program. But in 1947, none of this was public knowledge. To an ordinary person, the idea of a top-secret nuclear surveillance balloon was as unimaginable as a craft from another planet. This is where the tension begins to grow between the official story and the human experience. On one side, there is the explanation of science and secrecy. Project Mogul, with its balloons and instruments, carrying out a mission vital to national security. On the other side, there are eyewitnesses, ranchers, neighbors, and even local law enforcement, who looked at the debris and felt certain it was not something ordinary. The gulf between these two perspectives would widen in the days to come, creating a story that could not be contained by official words alone. But in this moment, as we linger with the quiet drift of balloons across the desert sky, we can see how easily mystery takes root. A project designed to remain hidden was bound to generate confusion when glimpsed unexpectedly. A culture of secrecy meant that straightforward answers could not be given, and a public already fascinated by flying saucers was primed to imagine extraordinary possibilities. The elements were all in place, waiting for the spark of one discovery on a quiet ranch. Breathe deeply now, and picture the scene high above the earth. Translucent balloons float gently in the stratosphere, their strings carrying delicate instruments, their radar reflectors glinting like mirrors in the sun. To those who launched them, they are just machines, fragile and temporary, meant to serve their purpose and then vanish. But to those who will find their remains, they will seem strange, enigmatic, perhaps even unearthly. This is how Project Mogul, conceived in silence, begins to intertwine with legend. Soon the story will descend to the ground, to a man named Mac Brazel, and the debris he stumbled upon in his fields. But for now, we remain suspended in the air, drifting with the balloons, understanding both their purpose and their mystery. They are, at once, ordinary tools of science and extraordinary seeds of speculation. They remind us that the line between the known and the unknown is often as thin as the desert wind, and that sometimes, what is hidden for reasons of security becomes the very thing that inspires wonder. The summer of 1947 was like many others in the quiet ranching communities of New Mexico. The days were long and hot, the nights wide and star-filled. Life moved slowly in the desert, where routines were shaped by weather, land, and livestock. But in late June or early July, something unusual interrupted this rhythm, something that would draw an ordinary man into one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. That man was William Mac Brazel, a rancher who managed land near Corona, about 70 miles north of Roswell. Brazel was no dreamer of flying saucers. He was a practical man, focused on tending his sheep and maintaining his fences. Yet while riding out on horseback after a summer storm, he came across a strange scattering of debris across the desert floor. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The debris seemed to stretch for hundreds of feet, littering the ground in a wide pattern. Brazel described pieces of unusual material, thin, metallic sheets that crumpled in his hands, but did not stay bent, lightweight sticks or beams that seemed stronger than wood, and odd fragments covered with markings that reminded some of hieroglyphics. To him, it looked nothing like the parts of a plane or any familiar equipment. The pieces were lightweight, almost delicate, yet they resisted breaking or burning. It was as though the wreckage belonged to something not of this world, or at least, not of ordinary design. Brazel gathered some of the material, and after discussing it with neighbors, decided to inform the authorities. His first stop was the local sheriff's office in Roswell. Sheriff George Wilcox listened to Brazel's account and inspected the samples he had brought. Unsure of what to make of it, the sheriff contacted the nearby Roswell Army Airfield, home to the 509th Bomb Group, the only group in the world at the time equipped with nuclear weapons. If anyone would know what this wreckage was, it would be them. From this moment, events began to accelerate. Military intelligence officer Major Jesse Marcel was dispatched to investigate. Marcel accompanied Brazel back to the ranch and examined the debris firsthand. Like Brazel, he was struck by its unusual properties. Later, Marcel would recall handling pieces of foil-like metal that could not be dented or destroyed, beams with strange symbols, and fragments that seemed to defy ordinary explanation. He collected as much as he could and transported it back to Roswell Airfield for further study. On July 8, 1947, the story took a dramatic turn. The public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield, Walter Haut, issued a press release stating that the military had recovered a flying disc. The announcement was printed in newspapers across the country, sparking immediate excitement. Headlines declared that the government had captured a flying saucer, and suddenly, Roswell was no longer just a quiet desert town. It was the center of global attention. But within 24 hours, the story changed. A second announcement was issued, this time stating that the wreckage was not a flying disc at all, but rather a weather balloon. Photographs were released showing Major Marcel and other officials examining debris made of rubber, sticks, and foil, ordinary materials that looked far different from the descriptions Brazel and Marcel had originally given. The message was clear: nothing mysterious had happened, and the matter was closed. Yet the contradictions were already too deep to be erased. Civilians had seen the original debris and described it as extraordinary. The military's swift reversal and the display of mundane balloon fragments only added to suspicion. Why, people wondered, had the Army first declared a flying disc and then so quickly retracted it? Why did the official explanation not match what eyewitnesses recalled? In the gap between these two stories, the seeds of mystery began to grow. For Mac Brazel, the incident was unsettling. Reports suggest he was pressured by the military to remain quiet, and his later comments reflected unease. He told a local newspaper that if he ever found anything unusual again, he would keep it to himself. For Major Marcel, the experience would linger for decades. Years later, he maintained that the debris he handled was not from a weather balloon, insisting that the official story did not match the truth of what he had seen with his own eyes. Psychologists and historians have often reflected on these accounts. Human memory, especially under stress or confusion, is fallible. Over time, details can shift, and stories can grow larger than the events themselves. Yet memory is also powerful, and the consistency of certain details, lightweight metallic sheets, strange symbols, unbreakable fragments, suggest that something unusual was indeed found. Whether that something was a Mogul balloon, a secret military device, or something far stranger remains the enduring question. The Roswell incident, in these first days, was marked by both confusion and contradiction. On one hand, there were ordinary people describing extraordinary materials. On the other, There was a military issuing conflicting statements and emphasizing secrecy. The public, already attuned to the idea of flying saucers, thanks to Kenneth Arnold's sighting just weeks earlier, was eager to connect the dots. And once the story entered the national imagination, it could never be fully contained again. Breathe deeply now and picture those moments, a rancher riding out under the desert sun, his horse slowing as he notices glimmers of unusual material scattered across the ground. A sheriff, unsure of what to make of it, turning to the military for answers. An intelligence officer, cradling strange fragments in his hands and wondering if they belong to something beyond human technology. And a nation, reading headlines about flying discs, only to be told the next day that it had all been a mistake. The desert kept its silence, but people could not. Whispers spread, stories grew, and questions deepened. In the years to come, eyewitnesses would come forward with accounts of not only debris, but bodies, of secret transports, of military cover-ups more elaborate than anyone had imagined. Whether these later stories were truth, memory shaped by time, or simply the power of imagination, they became inseparable from the Roswell legend. The Roswell incident was no longer just a moment in history. It had become a story, one that blended fact, rumor, and wonder into something larger than itself. And like all great stories, it did not end with answers, but with questions. What was the wreckage truly? Why did the military change its story? And why, after all these years, does the mystery continue to draw us back to that quiet ranch in New Mexico, under the same desert sky? As the night deepens in our story, we leave Mac Brazel's ranch behind and turn to the voices that carried the tale beyond New Mexico, the newspapers, the military spokesman, and the shifting narratives that transformed Roswell from a local incident into a legend whispered across the world. The story of Roswell, as strange as it already was, became even more mysterious once the press and government stepped in. In 1947, newspapers were the heartbeat of American communities. Radios carried voices into homes, but it was the printed headlines that shaped conversations at breakfast tables and in barbershops. When the Roswell Army Airfield issued its initial press release, the words struck like lightning: RAF captures flying disc on ranch in Roswell region. The headline spread quickly across local and national newspapers. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the extraordinary had entered the ordinary world. Imagine the scene: families unfolding their newspapers, coffee in hand, and seeing bold letters proclaiming that the United States military had captured a flying saucer. This was no rumor whispered on the street corner. It was an official statement released by the military itself. For many, it felt like confirmation that the strange objects reported across the skies in recent weeks were real. But as suddenly as the story appeared, it shifted. Within 24 hours, a new statement emerged from the military, insisting that the wreckage was not a flying disc, but instead a weather balloon. Newspapers scrambled to print retractions, and the bold, thrilling headline was replaced with mundane explanations. Photographs showed officers posing with fragments of rubber, sticks, and foil, claiming these were the remains recovered from the ranch. The reversal was jarring. Why had the military spoken so confidently of a flying disc, only to retract the claim so quickly? Some historians argue it was a simple error. The press release had been rushed, the terminology misunderstood, and the correction made as soon as higher-ranking officials intervened. Others, however, point out that this reversal carried the unmistakable weight of censorship and control. The message was clear: the extraordinary had been reduced to the ordinary, and no further questions were to be asked. But human curiosity is not so easily silenced. The abrupt shift only fueled suspicion. Locals who had seen the original debris insisted it was far stranger than the balloon scraps displayed for the press. Eyewitnesses recalled metallic sheets that would not burn or break, beams with odd markings, and materials that seemed to defy ordinary explanation. To them, the weather balloon story rang hollow, a cover too thin to conceal the truth. The psychology of secrecy is powerful. When institutions offer conflicting stories, trust begins to erode. People wonder not only what is being hidden, but why it is being hidden. Was the military trying to protect the public from panic? Was it covering up advanced technology, its own or someone else's? Or had it stumbled upon something so unexplainable that denial was the only option? Each unanswered question created space for imagination, and in that space, myths began to grow. The media of the 1940s was different from today. There were no 24-hour news channels, no internet to circulate rumors instantly. Yet stories spread quickly nonetheless, carried by word of mouth, radio broadcasts, and wire services connecting local papers to national outlets. Roswell, for a fleeting moment, became the focus of national curiosity. Then, just as swiftly, it was buried beneath the official explanation and the rush of other headlines. But something had shifted. Even as the story faded from newspapers, it lingered in memory. For the people of Roswell, it became part of local identity, an event whispered about in diners, repeated on front porches, and passed along to new generations. For those fascinated by flying saucers, Roswell became a touchstone, a symbol of what might happen when ordinary citizens brush against extraordinary mysteries. The secrecy of the time only deepened the effect. The late 1940s and early 1950s were years when the U.S. government withheld much from the public. Projects were hidden, code names multiplied, and explanations were rarely complete. In such an environment, mistrust became natural. People assumed that official statements concealed more than they revealed, and Roswell was interpreted through this lens of skepticism. Scholars of media history often point to Roswell as an early example of how narrative control works. An initial announcement created excitement, a correction attempted to contain it, and the resulting gap gave rise to decades of speculation. It demonstrates how powerful a single press release can be, and how dangerous a sudden retraction may become. In trying to quiet the story, the military may have inadvertently given it the spark it needed to endure. Imagine yourself in that moment, reading the first headline, feeling a ripple of wonder, and then the next day being told it was all a mistake. The sense of possibility replaced by disappointment, curiosity replaced by confusion. Yet, beneath it all, a question remains: why would the military announce something so extraordinary without certainty? And why would it backtrack so quickly? That question has never truly faded. As you breathe deeply, consider how stories live in the spaces between fact and imagination. The Roswell incident, shaped by media headlines and government secrecy, became more than an event. It became a puzzle. Each headline, each contradiction, each whisper of censorship became a piece of the puzzle, leaving future generations to assemble and reassemble the story in countless ways. This was the moment when Roswell shifted from a local discovery to a global enigma. No longer just a rancher's tale or a military investigation, it became part of a larger story about secrecy, trust, and the unknown. The desert had given its secret to the world, and the world, uncertain of what to believe, carried it forward into legend. As the story continues, we turn from the press and public back to the deeper layers of secrecy. Beyond weather balloons and newspaper headlines, what else was unfolding behind closed doors? Was Project Mogul the true explanation, or did other hidden agendas shape the events at Roswell? To answer that, we must look deeper into the culture of secrecy that defined the era. When we examine Roswell within the broader atmosphere of the late 1940s, it becomes clear that secrecy was not an accident. It was a deliberate way of life for governments, militaries, and intelligence agencies. Officially, Project Mogul was the explanation given decades later, a classified balloon project designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests by capturing low-frequency sound waves in the upper atmosphere. In many ways, Mogul explains some of the mystery, odd materials, secrecy, and the swift military involvement. Yet even if Project Mogul was part of the story, it may not have been the entire story. The late 1940s were a crucible of hidden agendas. The Cold War was beginning to cast its long shadow across the world. The United States had dropped atomic bombs just 2 years earlier, and the Soviet Union was racing to develop nuclear capabilities of its own. Every advancement, every secret weapon, every possible edge was guarded with layers of silence. In such an environment, even a minor slip could be seen as a threat to national security. Roswell, with its strange debris and confused messaging, became entangled in this climate of paranoia. Historians often point out that cover stories were a common practice in military culture. When a project was classified, public explanations were carefully crafted to conceal its true purpose. A weather balloon could serve as an ideal cover, simple, believable, and easily dismissed. If Roswell was connected to Project Mogul, or even to other classified experiments, then it makes sense that the government would quickly pivot from the extraordinary to the ordinary. Yet for many, this explanation still feels incomplete. The eyewitness descriptions of unusual metals, hieroglyph-like markings, and an overwhelming military presence seem far beyond the scope of balloons and sensors. This is where the idea of hidden agendas takes root. Some researchers argue that Roswell's secrecy was not just about concealing Project Mogul, but about controlling how much the public could ever know about advanced technologies, whether foreign, domestic, or perhaps even non-human. The reasoning was straightforward: to admit too much would not only expose military projects to enemies, but also risk unsettling the public, creating panic or distrust. Silence in this case became a tool of power. Psychologists studying secrecy note that it creates a ripple effect. The more something is hidden, the more people imagine what must be behind the curtain. At Roswell, the curtain was thick. Ordinary citizens saw convoys of military trucks removing wreckage. They were told not to speak. Some recalled strange nighttime operations, where debris was flown out under guard. These details, paired with the sudden switch in official statements, fueled the sense that something profound was being concealed. But if secrecy was part of national security, why did Roswell matter so much? One reason lies in timing. The incident came at the dawn of the flying saucer era. Just weeks before, in June 1947, pilot Kenneth Arnold had reported 9 unusual objects over Washington state, coining the phrase flying saucers. Newspapers were already primed to report on mysterious craft in the skies. Roswell arrived like a spark landing on dry grass. It ignited imagination at the exact moment when the world was ready to wonder. For officials, this timing was dangerous. Allowing the public to connect strange wreckage with the idea of saucers risked spiraling into hysteria. Thus, the balloon explanation was not just a cover. It was a way of managing perception. There is also the question of compartmentalization. In intelligence work, knowledge is divided, shared only on a need-to-know basis. It is possible that even some of the officers at Roswell were unaware of what they were handling. Their statements may have been honest reflections of confusion, later corrected when higher authorities revealed, or concealed, more context. If so, the shifting narrative was not just manipulation, but the byproduct of a deeply secretive system, where truth was fractured into pieces. Over the decades, researchers have suggested that Roswell's hidden agendas may have included more than Mogul. Some point to testing of advanced aircraft or materials that later influenced aerospace technology. Others wonder whether foreign technology, captured from the remnants of World War II, was being experimented with in secret. And of course, the most extraordinary theory lingers, that the debris was not of earthly origin at all. Each possibility carries its own logic, but what unites them is the certainty that secrecy was layered, intentional, and enduring. For the citizens of Roswell, this secrecy took on a personal dimension. Some felt pressured to remain silent, fearing repercussions if they spoke openly. Others carried memories that did not match the official story, creating a lifelong tension between what they had seen and what they were told to believe. This human side of secrecy is important. Beyond the headlines and theories are individuals who lived in the shadow of an event they could never fully explain. Their voices, sometimes trembling, sometimes insistent, are echoes of a mystery that official explanations never fully erased. As we breathe deeply and reflect on these hidden agendas, a pattern emerges. Roswell was not just about debris in the desert, it was about control. Control of information, control of perception, control of history itself. When institutions decide what to reveal and what to conceal, they shape not only events, but the way future generations will remember them. That is why Roswell endures. It is not merely a story of wreckage, it is a story of silence, secrecy, and the spaces where truth disappears. Let your thoughts settle on this idea. The desert may have held the debris, but the real mystery was carried in locked files, whispered orders, and carefully constructed narratives. What lies behind those locked doors remains uncertain, but the shadows they cast reach across decades. As we move forward, the story does not end here, because Roswell, shaped by secrecy, also became a seed planted in culture. Its echoes spread into films, books, television, and the shared imagination of humanity. To understand the full weight of the event, we must explore how this single moment in 1947 grew into one of the most enduring cultural legends of modern times. By the late 1940s, the Roswell incident had already slipped from the front pages, buried beneath official explanations and the rapid churn of post-war news. For decades, it lingered as a half-forgotten curiosity, discussed mostly among locals or those who remembered the strange headlines of July 1947. But as time passed, something remarkable happened. Roswell did not vanish. Instead, it slowly grew, its mystery blossoming into legend, until it became one of the most powerful cultural symbols of the 20th century. Part of this transformation began with timing. The decades following Roswell were filled with a rising tide of UFO reports. In the 1950s, as the Cold War deepened, ordinary citizens across the United States and beyond reported strange lights, disks, and shapes moving silently through the skies. The U.S. Air Force even established Project Blue Book in 1952, dedicated to cataloging and analyzing these reports. Though most cases were explained as natural or human-made phenomena, a small percentage remained unidentified. These official acknowledgments kept the question alive. If some things remained unexplained, could Roswell have been one of them? Culturally, the era was fertile ground for mystery. Science fiction was thriving. Drive-in theaters and pulp magazines filled imaginations with tales of space travel, alien visitors, and advanced technologies. Films such as The Day the Earth Stood Still 1951, and Earth vs. the Flying Saucers 1956, turned extraterrestrials into both symbols of fear and hope. While these stories were fictional, they drew from real-world anxieties, fear of nuclear war, mistrust of government, and wonder at humanity's future among the stars. Roswell, quietly sleeping in the background, fit seamlessly into this cultural tapestry. But the true resurgence of Roswell came in the late 1970s. It was then that investigators, journalists, and UFO researchers began revisiting the case with fresh eyes. Witnesses who had stayed silent for decades began sharing their stories, often speaking of debris far stranger than balloon materials, and of military officials who pressured them to remain quiet. Books such as Charles Berlitz and William L. Moore's The Roswell Incident, 1980 reignited public interest, framing Roswell not as a closed case, but as the beginning of the modern UFO mystery. This revival marked a turning point. From then on, Roswell was no longer just a local event. It was a symbol of hidden truths. As Roswell entered mainstream conversation again, it became more than just an incident. It became a canvas upon which culture painted its anxieties, hopes, and questions. For some, it was evidence of a government conspiracy, a symbol of mistrust toward institutions that seemed distant and secretive. For others, it represented humanity's longing for connection with something greater, a belief that we are not alone in the universe. In either form, Roswell was powerful because it balanced on the edge of possibility. It was never fully disproven, never fully explained, That gap made it endlessly adaptable. Television, film, and literature eagerly embraced the legend. By the 1990s, shows like The X-Files used Roswell as a cornerstone of their mythology, blending government secrecy with cosmic mystery. Documentaries, both serious and speculative, filled late-night programming, each offering its own take on what had happened in the desert of New Mexico. In popular imagination, Roswell shifted from a confusing event to the epicenter of UFO lore, the moment when the modern age of mystery truly began. Even beyond entertainment, Roswell seeped into culture in subtler ways. The small town of Roswell, New Mexico, eventually leaned into its role as custodian of the mystery. Alien-themed museums, festivals, and roadside attractions sprang up, drawing curious travelers from around the world. What had once been a story of secrecy became an engine for community identity and tourism. Each July, during the annual UFO festival, the streets fill with costumed aliens, lectures by researchers, and families eager to celebrate a story that began with a quiet rancher's discovery. Psychologists often note that myths endure not because they are proven, but because they touch something universal. Roswell touches the human need for wonder, for stories that stretch beyond the limits of our daily lives. In a world often filled with certainty and explanation, the idea that one event might hold a truth too large, too strange, or too important to be revealed, provides both mystery and comfort. To lie in bed and imagine that we are not alone is to connect with one of humanity's oldest questions. Roswell also became a mirror for changing times. During the Cold War, it symbolized secrecy and mistrust of government. During the space race, it symbolized the excitement of discovery and the possibility of advanced civilizations. In the digital age, it symbolizes the flood of hidden truths waiting to be uncovered, as new leaks, documents, and testimonies continue to appear. Each generation has reshaped Roswell to reflect its own fears and hopes, ensuring that the story never grows old. As you breathe deeply, consider how unusual this is. Few events, especially those that began with such confusion and contradiction, endure for nearly a century. Yet Roswell has not only endured, it has grown stronger with time. Each book, each film, each whispered conversation in the dark has added to its weight. It has become less about what was found in the desert and more about what it represents, the possibility that reality is stranger, deeper, and more mysterious than we allow ourselves to believe. In this way, Roswell moved from secrecy into legend. It became not just a question of what happened in 1947, but a story about us, our imagination, our doubts, and our longing to reach beyond the stars. That is why the legend continues. For every skeptic who dismisses it, there is another who wonders quietly in the night. What if the desert really did reveal something extraordinary? And so as we leave behind the cultural echoes, we turn toward the present. For Roswell is not merely history, it is a living mystery. Investigators, researchers, and governments continue to revisit the case, peeling back layers of secrecy in search of answers. What have modern investigations revealed, and how does Roswell continue to shape the UFO question today? That is the journey we will take next. For decades after 1947, Roswell lingered like a half-forgotten dream, occasionally remembered, occasionally dismissed, but never fully resolved. Then, beginning in the late 1970s and continuing into the modern day, the mystery resurfaced with new intensity. What had once been a fading local story transformed into a subject of international debate, fueled by researchers, eyewitness testimonies, and eventually, the slow release of declassified government documents. The first wave of renewed interest came from independent investigators. In 1978, nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman interviewed Major Jesse Marcel, the Roswell Army Airfield Intelligence Officer, who had handled the debris in 1947. Marcel insisted that what he had seen was not a weather balloon, but something far stranger, materials that did not behave like anything known at the time. His testimony reawakened curiosity, and soon researchers began combing through archives, tracking down witnesses, and piecing together a puzzle long left in the shadows. Books, documentaries, and conferences followed. Each added new fragments of testimony, ranchers recalling metallic sheets that resisted fire, military nurses describing unusual recovery operations, and townsfolk remembering stern warnings to remain silent. Some stories were inconsistent, others unverifiable, but together they created a tapestry of accounts that painted Roswell as more than a simple balloon recovery. The public, once told to forget, now leaned forward to listen. The government, too, eventually responded. In the 1990s, with mounting pressure from researchers and members of Congress, the U.S. Air Force conducted formal reviews of the Roswell case. Their findings, published in reports in 1994 and 1997, concluded that the wreckage had indeed come from Project Mogul, specifically, high-altitude balloon arrays, designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The reports also suggested that rumors of alien bodies may have arisen from misidentified memories of crash test dummies used in later experiments. For some, these explanations seemed reasonable, even convincing, but for many others, the reports only deepened suspicion. Why had it taken nearly 50 years for such explanations to emerge? Why were so many eyewitnesses convinced the materials were unlike anything earthly? And why did the Air Force feel the need to produce not one, but two major reports, decades after the event? Skeptics argued that these documents were less about solving the mystery and more about closing it, offering just enough detail to appear thorough while leaving deeper questions untouched. Meanwhile, the cultural tide was shifting. In the 2000s and 2010s, interest in UFOs, rebranded by the military as UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena, surged once again. Pilots reported encounters with strange objects moving at incredible speeds. Leaked Navy videos showed unidentified craft defying conventional aerodynamics. And in 2017, the revelation of a Pentagon program called AATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, confirmed that the U.S. government had continued to investigate UFOs in secret. Suddenly, the world realized that far from being dismissed, the UFO question had remained quietly alive within the halls of power. Roswell inevitably returned to the center of discussion. If modern military encounters with unexplained craft were real, could the roots of such phenomena stretch back to 1947? Some researchers suggested that Roswell was the original template, the moment when governments first realized that something extraordinary might be visiting our skies, and the moment when secrecy became the default response. Others proposed that Roswell was less about extraterrestrials and more about advanced technologies, whether experimental aircraft, foreign devices, or prototypes decades ahead of their time. The release of declassified files has added fuel to this fire. While no document has ever surfaced explicitly confirming that Roswell involved extraterrestrial technology, the sheer volume of redactions, missing records, and conflicting accounts continues to inspire speculation. In some cases, files once classified for decades have been released only to reveal gaps or anomalies, entire sections blacked out, timelines that do not align, or references to projects never fully explained. For the public, these fragments serve less as closure and more as an invitation to keep asking questions. Beyond documents, modern technology has allowed researchers to re-examine Roswell with new tools. Satellite imagery, digital archives, and forensic analysis have been applied to old photographs and testimonies. Some researchers claim to have identified potential crash sites beyond the original debris field. Others argue that memory, shaped by time and suggestion, may have colored eyewitness accounts. In either case, Roswell has become not only a story of history, but also a living laboratory for how we investigate mystery itself. And still, governments remain cautious. Even as officials confirm the reality of unexplained aerial encounters today, they rarely speak directly about Roswell. This silence keeps the legend alive. It leaves room for interpretation, for imagination, and for the quiet possibility that somewhere in locked vaults, the answers still exist. For those lying awake at night, Listening to this story, Roswell serves as both a comfort and a challenge. It reminds us that even in an age of surveillance and satellites, there are still secrets too vast to be fully understood. It challenges us to wonder whether the truth is too mundane, too extraordinary, or too dangerous to ever be revealed. Take a slow breath and imagine the desert once again. The stars overhead, the quiet sands stretching into darkness, and beneath it all, the lingering echo of a mystery that has never been silenced. Roswell, carried forward by witnesses, researchers, and declassified fragments, continues to whisper across time, there is more than we are told. As we turn to the final reflections, the story of Roswell invites us not only to ask what happened, but to consider what it means. Whether balloon, experiment, or encounter with the unknown, Roswell is a mirror reflecting our fears, our doubts, and our boundless curiosity.